Welcome back. Now, civil society groups want the government to ban the use of Terbufos. It's a hazardous chemical that has been implicated in the deaths of children who ate food from spaza shops. It is licensed for use as a pesticide in the agricultural sector. Joining us is Miriam Mayet, Executive Director at African Centre for Biodiversity. Thank you for your time, Miriam. We certainly appreciate it. Perhaps we could start with you helping us understand, in the call for this ban, why Terbufos is so deadly.
All right, so good afternoon, and thank you very much for inviting me. And the first thing we want to say is that we don't want to accept the narrative that Terbufos, pesticide poisoning, and spaza shops are related. So that's the first issue. So what I want to say is that Terbufos has been classified by the World Health Organization as an acutely toxic poisonous pesticide. And this pesticide has been banned in the European Union. And this ban has taken effect since 2009. It's been banned in several countries in the SADC region. And it's banned because of its acute toxic effects on humans, both in terms of ingestion and exposure. Now, the second issue I want to say or draw our attention to is that pesticide poisoning by Terbufos is not a new issue. It has its roots in research conducted by Professor Andrea Rother from the University of Cape Town and her team, documenting pesticide poisoning on the part of especially poor Black children from urban areas in the townships going back 2 decades. And consistently a demand has been made to the ministers, the relevant authorities over the last 2 decades to ban Terbufos. Moreover, researchers have told the government that there is a huge problem with regulatory failure, that the state is unable to ensure that hazardous pesticides, including Terbufos, is properly regulated. So that it has now landed up in the urban areas. And we know that it has killed 6 children from Naledi and 22 other children during this food crisis and food systems collapse, also suffered acute poisoning by Terbufos. And so at the same time, government also published regulations exempting a lot of highly hazardous pesticides from being phased out. So many issues came together. But more than that, we took great offense to the mudding of the waters by the media, by CropLife, by the authorities to conflate the issue of pesticide poisoning on the part of these children by Terbufos and other foodborne diseases, and then the entire national attention has been shifted away from underlying causes to persecution of the spaza shops. And the spaza shops need to be dealt with in its own right in a food systems perspective, including in the context of service delivery. You see, so what we're seeing here is persecution and also complete refusal by government to ban highly hazardous pesticides, to ban Terbufos, and to transition our agriculture to a more sustainable and ecologically sustainable and socially just system. So that's kind of where we're coming from.
Yeah, and Miriam, that's precisely the problem, isn't it? That we continue to see Terbufos as a domestic pesticide that is common in most households, in the townships especially. And it appears there's been some cracks when it comes to the regulation of this chemical. Where do you think those cracks seem to appear, and where can they be plugged to ensure that it's used specifically for agricultural purposes?
It can't be plugged because the failure of the state, the dismantling of the regulatory state to keep us safe from hazardous poisons is so profound that the state will need to invest huge amount of resources in our public health system. It will have to employ huge amounts of resources to track and trace and enforce the passage of the herbicide through the value system, and they haven't been able to do that. Because I'll give you a couple of examples. The first thing is that Terbufos can be bought online. It will not have a label saying restricted for agricultural use only. It can be bought from gardening shops, co-ops, and so on in bulk, and it's being decanted into nondescript bottles bearing no labels. Now, this is also the flip side of this abject failure of service delivery in poor black townships. And so the infestation has become so acute for these communities, living with rats, cockroaches, lice, all kinds of things, that commercial pesticides that they've been buying over the counter, these pesticides are no longer they're no longer effective because of the resistance being built up in these cockroaches and rats. And this is what we call the pesticide treadmill. So you have to go and find another more toxic chemical. So you can't put the blame on urban communities, on children, on spaza shops for the ingestion by children of granules. You see, where they got it from is not the issue, because it's not the spaza shop's duty to protect children from pesticide poisoning. It's the duty of the state to ensure that very, very toxic chemicals, where children come into contact with it just by touching it and transferring it to their mouths, they can become very ill or die. So I think that we're at a stage where we're saying that it's an impossibility for the state to be able to exercise its regulatory functions in an effective way.
Yeah. So let's talk about the contained environments in which Terbufos is used precisely in agricultural sectors. And it has been said that even in those environments, it still poses serious risks in terms of its toxicity.
Okay, so now we're dealing with a different group of people, right? And we're dealing with some of the most marginalized, forgotten, invisible people in the agriculture system. And these are farm workers. So I want to also say that farm workers are not only comprised of so-called, colored communities living and working on orchards, grape farms. It's also a lot of migrants that have come in from the region. And they are escaping a whole range of also broken systems in their own countries, looking for better opportunities. So the issue is that Terbufos and other hazardous pesticides are sprayed on all of these crops. And farm workers, and we have video material from our partners and from farm workers showing how they live, eat, sleep, drink with large amounts of pesticides in huge drums, unlabeled. And you know what's happened is that there's been a normalization. The normalization that these forgotten people, invisible, sacrificed people should live and die with these pesticides. They should be poisoned with the same pesticide that have killed the Naledi children, and we don't have to care about it because so-called food security will be jeopardized. We will all starve to death if we ban Terbufos. This is the argument of our government. And we know this is completely untrue. So the issue of farm workers being poisoned intergenerationally, you must remember that there is no legislation protecting children from pesticide. Yeah. So if farm workers are intergenerationally living on farms, as children, they were exposed to toxic chemicals. And as adults, they continue to be exposed to chemicals. And so I think we are sitting with a huge community of farm workers who are extremely sick. Children, young people, the aged, because of the cumulative effect of the exposure and long-term exposure to pesticides. So it's a really very big issue, and this is why we feel that this is the moment that we want to really get some relief for urban communities as well as rural communities. But we also are people who work in the food system, not only on pesticides. And we will be knocking on the government's door around urban food systems issues. But for the time being, we will be approaching the courts for a ban on not only Terbufos, but at least the 57 highly hazardous pesticides that cause cancers and other very serious diseases in humans to be banned within 6 months.
Yeah.
Now,
and in your lawsuits and your court bids to ensure that Terbufos is completely banned, do you know of any long-term effects that some people are suffering from and perhaps are hoping to litigate as well, short to long-term effects of this toxic chemical?
And they will be most entitled to litigate, because those who survive poisoning have very acute neurological problems. So their central nervous system gets affected. There are studies showing that particularly children who were exposed to Terbufos and other hazardous pesticides may not even pass standard 2. They have serious cognitive dysfunction, as well as other physical impairments like incontinence and other physiological problems. So this is why the government is so obstinate in not wanting to ban, because it will be an admission of guilt on their part if they ban it, that they have been not only grossly negligent, but they have been complicit in turning a blind eye to what researchers, independent researchers, professors at the University of Cape Town have been warning them for more than 2 decades. All the evidence is there. So, so this is the position, and we expect that it will be strenuously defended by the state. They have to defend it because precisely the reasons you point out, they're afraid of damages actions that may arise on the part of particularly the children who have survived the poisoning, because they have huge damages claims against the state.
Yeah, we'll have to leave it there. Miriam, thank you for speaking to us this afternoon in this very important conversation. We'll have to leave it there. She is the Executive Director at African Centre for Biodiversity.